The case study we worked on is about government policies on taxation of tobacco. The Australian government wants to increase the taxation on tobacco in order to decrease the number of smokers and the number of lung cancer and other health issues caused by smoking. Prior tax increases have shown that higher prices for tobacco decreases the number of smokers. From about a quarter in the early 1990s, the number fell to only 13% in 2016. The government announced to keep increasing tobacco excises. In 2020, a packet of cigarettes will cost about $40.
In the article, Joanne is quoted as saying that the price rise would not stop her from smoking. For Joanne, the cigarettes are a necessity. The concept behind this is represented by elasticity, which is a measure of how much a buyer responds to a change in the market. A smaller price elasticity implies a smaller responsiveness of the customer. In the first graph, we will represent the demand for a necessity, which would be more steep. Therefore, if the price was $25 for a pack of cigarettes and then it increased to $40, the quantity does not differ that much. Whereas in the second graph, we will represent a luxury, and then the demand curve would be more flat, meaning it would be more elastic, and a change in price from $25 to $40 will affect the quantity much more than in the first one. Joanne's case is represented in the first graph because for her, smoking is a necessity, and her demand curve is relatively inelastic. More precisely, a given percentage change in price leads to a proportionally smaller change in quantity demanded.
In the article, Yeltsin is quoted as stating, "I'm an addict, so I would keep on smoking, but not that much anymore." If the majority of smokers represent Yeltsin's view, what do you expect the market for cigarettes to look like, with the tobacco excise being imposed? To our mind, the answer is figure D. If the majority of smokers would have Yeltsin's point of view, the cigarettes would represent more of a luxury than a necessity. But from the wording, not that much anymore, we cannot really tell how steep or flat the demand curve would be. Therefore, it could be either demand curve B, C, or D. But we decided to go with figure D because increasing tobacco excise would rather make the customers pay for the majority of the tax than the suppliers. In the graph, the green part here represents the tax burden for customers, and the red one, this one, represents the tax burden for sellers. An excise tax is an indirect tax on the sale of a particular good, such as tobacco or alcohol. Indirect means that the tax is not directly paid by an individual customer. Instead, the producer passes it on to the customer by including it in the product's price. Tax incidence is the study of who bears the burden of a tax, and the general rule states that the burden of the tax falls more heavily on the side of the market that is less elastic. And in this case, obviously, the demand curve is less elastic than the supply curve. In general, on a free market, the quantity demanded of a good is the amount of the good that the buyers are willing and able to purchase. The law of demand says, other things equal, the quantity demanded of a good falls when the price of the good rises. So for a certain price, a customer demands a certain quantity. If the price rises to price 2, the quantity demanded gets less. On a free market, there are numbers of buyers. The market demand is the sum of all the individual demands. If we look on the buyer, Yeltsin, who is very likely to represent other buyers of the tobacco market too. He admits he's addicted and would keep on smoking if taxes rise, but not that much anymore. So Yeltsin's demand for cigarettes would get less. He would demand less cigarettes. The law of supply says, other things equal, the quantity supplied of a good rises when the price of the good rises. As we can see here, for price 1, there is quantity 1 supplied, and for price 2, there's more quantity supplied. So if tobacco excise is being imposed, the supply and demand would look like D, as we said, and we could see here that this line would represent the price without tax. This one here, the price the buyer has to pay, and this point on would be the price the sellers receive.
Holding all other factors constant, if smokers were more sensitive to the increase in the tobacco excise, the deadweight loss would be smaller. This statement is false. This is a normative statement which is rather subjective and can be tested by looking at the available evidence. The deadweight loss is the reduction in total surplus when a tax is introduced, where some potential gains from trade are lost to buyers and sellers. By adopting an empirical approach, we can say that the statement is false, as the deadweight loss depends on the price elasticities of supply and demand. In the first graph, we would have the case where the demand is rather elastic and the supply, and then this would be the size of the tax, and the colored area will represent the deadweight loss. Then in the second graph, the demand would be very steep, and then we would keep the supply the same. The size of the tax would be the same as in the first graph, and the colored area would be the deadweight loss, which is smaller than in the first graph. In this case, it is stated that smokers are sensitive to the increase in price, therefore the demand would be elastic. This would lead to a reduction in quantity demanded. According to economists, the greater the elasticity of demand, the greater the deadweight loss, and the larger the decline in equilibrium quantity.
We watched the anti-smoking ad by the Australian government and discussed the question. When someone chooses to smoke, they understand that they have an increased chance of lung cancer. That is, the private costs of the individual are already accounted for. Therefore, the government should not bother wasting taxpayers' money on scare campaigns to deter smokers. Do we agree or disagree? We disagree with this statement because smoking is not something that only affects the smoker himself, but also people around him. The government should not stop spending money on scare campaigns, to our mind, to deter smokers. Although it's true that most people who choose to smoke know about the effects, they should be kept. The government should keep on reminding them by campaigns and the media, because as we said, it not only affects themselves and their health, but also people around them. According to cancer.newsouthwales.government.au, Mass media campaigns are one of the most effective means to reduce smoking, especially when they offer smokers support services, as we can see on the end of the ad, where you have the phone number of a helpline. Moreover, reducing the number of smokers through informing them about the consequences would lead to reducing the amount of people that get sick. It's cheaper to spend the tax money on advertising than to spend the tax money on treating diseases directly caused by smoking. In addition, we can even touch the subject of externalities. Smoking represents a negative externality, since it affects the people around the smoker as well. The best solution is to internalize it by alerting incentives so that the buyer take into account all the effects of the actions. This means that scare campaigns are more effective when they present the harmful effects smoking has on people around them as well. To give an example, a smoking parent, if he or she is aware that the kid faces the same consequences for risk their health, they would probably be more likely to stop the smoking habit. In conclusion, this campaign can turn out to be very useful and therefore is worth the tax spent on it.